Bruce, we're on. All right, I'm going to call our meeting to order today. We'll give Bruce just a second to run back up here with the agenda. And our first item will be motion to approve our November meeting minutes. See if anybody had any edits to those at all. If not, I'll just need a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Let's see, since we have a couple people in the audience, if we have any citizens to be heard on items not on the agenda today? No? All right, we're moving right along. All right, so our new business first item will be a presentation on the city green print.
Hi, board members. My name is Melody Inns, Sustainability Specialist with the city. So I'm going to talk about how the green print might give some recommendations for the Airpark. So in 2011, green print was first created to guide the city's sustainability efforts and ultimately reduce our community-wide greenhouse gas emissions. And then in 2021, the plan was updated to Greenprint 2.0 with a new greenhouse gas inventory, information, and strategies to further guide the city's efforts as well. And in today's presentation, we're breaking it into different topics, starting with energy first. So there are certain initiatives that we recommend. Firstly, the energy efficiency topic. We would love to see new buildings being built and retrofitting old buildings to high energy efficiency standards. And by high energy standards is basically buildings that would include appropriate building insulation, high efficiency appliances, such as those with Energy Star ratings, and high efficiency lighting such as LED, or even building designed to harness natural lighting as much as possible. And then there's others like smart AC controls, building automation systems that basically save energy altogether. And in our Greenprint 2.0 strategy 6.11, actually 6.12, recommends building all new municipal facilities to a nationally recognized high-level performing standard. And some examples include LEED, which stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And there's also Florida Building Coalition and Energy Star standards. These are just some examples. And on top of that, we also recommend having solar, including solar panel in consideration where appropriate, and also advantages. Sometimes rooftop solar might be possible, and sometimes ground mount system might be more applicable for sites, and that will be determined by a solar feasibility study. So yeah, the next point is on cool roof. So this is a concept where, when solar isn't an option, we would love for cool roof to be considered on structures or buildings. Cool roofs do not absorb as much heat as traditional roofs, therefore lowering energy costs and reducing urban heat island effect. And we do note that with an operation in Airpark, safety is of greatest concern. So solutions such as solar and cool roofs should be evaluated to ensure that any reflectiveness does not cause visibility concerns for pilots or any other safety concerns that might be applicable to an airport. However, these solutions are actually used by many airports across the world, and their placement on the site just might need to be tailored and be specific to the landing and takeoff pattern in our own airport. Next on, we would like to talk about transportation. So charging stations for EV, electric vehicles, are recommended too. We suggest 2% of all places, all the parking spaces should be EV installed, meaning that they are already available for anyone to use and charge their EVs. And then 10 to 15% of spaces should be EV capable for future expansion, basically. And these lots should be available to both staff and the public. And then golf carts and other company vehicles should be electric as well, and that depends on market availability to find the suitable vehicles. And there was a question from before. So there is an electric golf cart provided to the FBO, and any replacement should be electric as per city policy. We do have a green fleet policy that is called Alternative Fuel Vehicles and Vehicle Purchasing Guideline, where departments should replace all light-duty vehicles and applicable equipment with alternative fuel options by 2040. And in support of this goal, all new light-duty vehicle purchases must be alternatively fueled after October 1st, 2028. So there's a moving plan there. And for the aircrafts, we definitely want to be involved in, not be involved, but rather continue the investigation and discussion on electric aircrafts for future use. And I'm by no means an expert in sustainable aviation, but I did a little research, and it seems like the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Federal Aviation Administration, is working to build a net zero sustainable aviation system by 2050 that will make aviation cleaner, quieter, and more sustainable. So we hope that to look further into their plan and see if there's any knowledge that we can borrow from there. And those include sustainable aviation fuels, which is produced from renewable and waste feedstock that can provide the greatest impact in efforts of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And there's also developments on new aircrafts, engine technology too, that is done through a partnership between Sustainable Flight National Partnership, NASA, and FAA, basically to accelerate the development of more efficient aircraft and engine technologies. With a 30% improvement in fuel savings compared to today's planes. So that's great news, and we would love to just dive deeper into that. And water, on the topic of water, we would love to recommend prioritizing low-impact development and utilizing rainwater capture systems for buildings, and that will be able to divert that rainwater to assist with any landscaping needs to reduce water use. And low-impact development is a design approach that emphasizes conservation and use of on-site natural features to protect water quality. And cisterns, bioswales, and rain gardens are some of the examples. And for landscaping, so there's a recommendation for integrative pest management, which provides long-term pest prevention using natural control methods, and also only use pesticides if no other option is effective or practical. IPM should be considered to treat all landscaping and turf on site. And to further prevent the need for excessive irrigation and pesticide use, native plants should be prioritized whenever possible in all landscaping practices. Moving on to waste, we definitely want to see recycling centers on site with proper visible signage for educational purpose. And here's an example of our current flyer that we give to residents in the Simplify to 5 for recycling practices. So resilience is a big part of what we want to focus on as well, just because of the geographical location of Clearwater, we definitely want to see our facilities getting hardened and essential infrastructure designed to withstand hurricane, intense tropical cyclone winds. And then stormwater management should be also part of the practice where green infrastructure is prioritized, and then which helps to reduce the effect of extreme precipitation, flooding. And then thirdly, something that often gets left out is urban heat island effect. So we do want to consider pavements that will minimize heat absorption as well. Yeah, so on environmental justice, we're hoping that the airport continues involving the surrounding neighborhoods and explore options for preventing excessive levels of pollution and other impacts such as noise, odor, and traffic that may result from an airport operation. And on continuous reporting, it will be really helpful to gather helpful metrics like fuel, electricity, and water consumption, and being collaborative in how we evaluate the environmental footprint and setting goals for future practices between the operation and the city. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. Do you guys have any questions?
I just, one comment I'd love to make. In the transportation area, one of the things that's always kind of bugged me is the number of city vehicles that insist on their engines running all day long. You see the sewer department guy is parked and the car is idling for 2 hours while he's doing a job. That's insane. I understand the police car. I realize they say that's got to get moving again. But the others, I think it's just to keep the radios going. Well, can't you get a radio that doesn't use so much power that you can't just run it off the battery? It just seems, I can't believe how many hundreds of gallons are wasted every day. Tens of thousands in cities all over the country where all these vehicles are all sitting there idling all day. It seems to me that's just really easy fruit you could get that would really have an impact on the budget and everything else. So I'd just like to throw that out there. And your ideas about sustainable fuels and all that, we've spent, the general aviation industry we've spent, 10 or 15 years working on getting rid of 100 low-lead, to a non-leaded fuel. So it's going to be a long time until my airplane runs on sustainable fuel. I'm sorry to say that ain't going to happen anytime soon.
I have one question. This is Greenpoint 2.0, and so everything is a suggestion. We're suggesting that, and we're recommending that. Is there any chance there's going to be some action taken?
Oh, yes. So I think the presentation was sort of shaped in a way that, how we can work with the Airpark. But we do have actionable strategies in the green print itself, and all those strategies guide our sustainability efforts from the city. So I personally am working a lot on outreach and education to inform the public of certain, like increasing the awareness for environmental protection and increasing the knowledge for our residents to be able to be super informed in how to save energy at home. An example would be this Saturday, we have the sustainability conference held at Morningside Rec Center where it's a free to attend event where we invite a lot of nonprofit speakers and citizen panelists to talk about solar energy, electric vehicle, energy efficiency, and also how to actually finance such purchases. And we definitely are moving towards just sparking the conversation and making it an interactive session and just to get the conversation going. That's one front. And then on the municipal side, we are working towards getting solar panels, and also increasing our EV charging stations. So definitely in the works, and the strategies in Greenprint guide us.
I think I can add to that a little bit too, and just for some context. Certainly because we operate this through a lease agreement, our sustainability department can be a resource to the tenant. And as new information comes through them, we can certainly share that. But, as a city, we can control the new vehicles we purchase. We can make decisions on what we purchase and supply to the tenant. But certainly they're going to make business decisions too, that they may rely on some of this information to make a better business decision when it comes to the building they construct and those things. Because if you save energy, you save money. So, there's an incentive there, but you also have to balance that with what is that expenditure versus your ROI.
Yep.
So a lot of these things may not have an ORI, but they're the right thing to do. And, can the city impose that on a private business? And I think that therein lies the question, had we incorporated a bunch of requirements related to Greenprint into a lease agreement, that may have been a non-starter because it was too costly. And we didn't even know the costs, and we don't know those costs at this point. I do know that FlyUSA is very interested in the EV charging stations as part of the new parking lot and things of that nature. And I think it's in their best interest to be to track fuel usage and energy usage, because that's part of their business plan. I mean, you have to control those costs, and what better way to be able to leverage our own city department and have us supply information and resources to them throughout this process. So I think that's the relationship between sustainability and FlyUSA going forward. But there's things that we are already doing. My department's buying hybrid vehicles and things of that nature. So that's something that we're already, and the city can control what the city does. If FlyUSA were to buy non-hybrid vehicles, there's really not something we can do about that, and nor really should we. But I think it's for me, it's a resource that's available.
Oh, yeah, and that's it. When it comes to who's going to write the check. I sat on the original stakeholders committee that worked for 7 months to write Greenprint. And all these years later, I'm a little disappointed because we sold it to city council and they agreed to everything. The only thing they didn't agree to in the initial presentation was that we had a 50% reduction by 2035 in emissions. And so we lowered that to 30, took it back, and they approved everything. And there was precious little actually achieved. Charging stations, yes, and we started using liquefied natural gas LNG for city vehicles and the buses. There were a lot of critical aspects there that we gave them actionable. It was a measurable and actionable plan. And they agreed to it, and then so now we've got 2-0, and you get to try again, so I'm going to come help you if you want. But that's why I asked the question. All things are nice and make sense until somebody's got to write the check, and that's what we ran into. The park at the west side on the bayfront that runs down to the bay, from Gulf to Bay down to the bay, that and the property north of Gulf to Bay where the hotel is, right on the Bayside Bridge. That hotel and that elevation dumps down, and that was a watershed, a critical watershed for the bay. And instead, we permitted it out, we changed it, and allowed them to fill it in and build a hotel. But then about 8 years later, they finally put that, made a park there in that that raw land, that was a wetland, and it saved it from development, but that's why I asked. I appreciate everything you're doing, and I admire your hope. I don't share your hope right now, but we'll see.
I'll hold on to it.
I don't worry about it well, and as it pertains to the Airpark, I don't think there's a problem there in the operation of the Airpark. The studies on it show that it's like 0.1% higher than the average surrounding area. The problem with that property is Sarnago. They are recycling concrete and asphalt for decades up there. And they sit at big piles of it on the ground, and you know that seeps. And then just immediately south of there is a depression with all those PVC pipes sticking up. That's to release the carbon dioxide from what used to be the city dump. So that's where the problem is, and it's not the Airpark. Okay, I'll be quiet now.
That's your point.
Eric, I was very interested in what you said because you've answered a couple questions I was going to ask.
Yeah.
One of the things going forward, we have talked in the past about potential development of various kinds at the airport. So are we looking at the city, I don't want to use the term force, but encourage any development there, whether it's by the current tenant or future tenants, to employ green print. In other words, let's say, for example, we're going to build a different terminal. There's a lot of things that you talked about that can be incorporated to sort of meet with your goals. But is the city going to insist on those being incorporated? As you said, that can tend to increase costs, but there's a sort of a weight and balance here.
Yeah,
that you have to achieve.
all the projects that are anticipated, terminal, corporate hangars and the like, and T hangars, certainly we will be engaging with Fly USA on the scope, size of the project, cost of the project. And I would say that all things are on the table, but we'd be remiss if we created a situation where we put obstacles in place to them completing a project because we insisted on $1 million worth of solar. That there's some challenges with an airfield with the reflectivity and all those things. So, I think it has to be a business decision and it has to be reasonable.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
what
think, is there opportunity for us to suggest, cool roofs and things like that? Absolutely, and I think it affects their bottom line. If they reduce their, HVAC costs by 20%, that's a win for everybody, provided, but that seems like a kind of a lower bar and something that we might be able to accomplish. So we're going to have those conversations as we design these things and through those processes. But I think at any point when you try to establish a lease agreement, you're establishing this base lease agreement, and then if you change terms along the way and say, oh, by the way, that's going to cost you an extra $1 million, I think you fundamentally created a legal problem for yourself by changing the terms without amending a lease.
Yeah, I agree.
And I can understand that too. I just want to make sure that we don't miss an opportunity for the city to work with the tenant and departments within the city, not just sustainability, but, Parks and Rec or whoever it is that does all the landscaping for the city. Maybe you already have access to all these, native plants and stuff, and I'm not quite sure, who would be responsible for any kind of landscaping at the Airpark. I mean, is that all the tenant responsibility, or is that,
Yeah.
city responsibility
It
for any of
is, and to the extent that they'll be responsible for those things. However, and I'll talk about it during my presentation to you, but for instance, the western fence that is completely overgrown and in really bad shape, we went and inspected that with Parks and Rec the other day to see if there was an opportunity to resolve it. But I'll talk about it in a minute.
Okay, yeah, because that was the kind of thing, I just wasn't quite sure,
Yeah.
who would, in the end, be responsible for things, like adding rain barrels seems like an easy thing. Would that be the city that does that, though, or the tenant? And I just would like to see the continued collaboration of all the different available departments of working together.
And as far as, the recycling came up, our intent is to ensure that we have adequate receptacles out there and things like that. Those subterranean compactors are ridiculously expensive. They put several out on the beach, and that would not be, consistent with what we would want out there. Ridiculously expensive.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I was going off of what the picture was in the
Yeah.
presentation, and I was like, well, that's not what what's there now, so I wasn't sure if something like that would be updated. And then as far as the continuous reporting, you mentioned that the tenant, Fly USA, would probably just be doing that anyway, and so I'm hoping that if you talk to them and they say they're doing something like that, that they would be open to sharing that information then back with sustainability.
Yeah, we have an annual reporting requirement that's pretty robust. But I think, the market tends to take care of some of these things because they have to make good business decisions. If they've got, fuel shrinkage for whatever reason or any issues of that nature, they need to be on top of it to make sure they're profitable.
Yeah.
And I think, that tends to take care of itself if you're trying to run this to make a profit at it. And whereas municipalities, sometimes, that's not the model. And I think that's the advantage of this type of arrangement through a lease, is that there is definite incentive to be frugal on their part because it affects their bottom line. Whereas if it's something taxpayer funded, sometimes municipalities don't pay that level of attention to that.
I get that. All right, anybody else have any other
I'm
questions?
just going to say one more thing. I'm involved in working at a number of airports, and one of the things, sustainability, resiliency is a big, big issue. And there are aviation groups, or there are a number of airports that are involved in aviation groups that deal with this. So I'm just saying that if you, as sort of the representative of the city, wants to find out a little bit more, do some digging, and I think you may even be able to, shall I say, garner information off of some of the things that are going on in the industry. And you can determine how they might apply to a smaller airport such as the Airpark.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thanks, Ellen.
All right, well, our next agenda item was supposed to be to welcome our new board member, but for those of you who did not hear what happened, the guy who was appointed by the city council just got a job with the city, so that is a conflict for him to participate on the board, so he already had to resign. So we will have to circle back with the city to appoint a new member.
I've already put it in my notes.
Okay. All right, so next, we are on to our next year already. So we have to elect our 2023 chair and vice chair.
Nominate you.
So we'll see if you have any discussion or any motions for those positions. And Eric, can you just clarify that ex officio members are not allowed to participate in those
I
positions?
believe that to be correct, Nicole. Yes. I don't, because
I believe you're right. I just don't know off the top of my head.
So we have 4 voting members here, or is it?
Oh, we only have 3 voting right now. Ex officio, as of now, is not allowed to vote, but these will be items I'm also going to bring up tomorrow to the council.
It is not spoken to in your rules and, your bylaws and procedures. Let me look under,
I don't know if I have a limit. How many times am I allowed to do it?
The rest of your
Is
life.
there a limit on how many times you can do as a term? Okay.
Ought to try.
it's not mentioned under election of officers who may vote, and I'm looking to see where the ex officio member is in here.
It was added a couple years ago.
Into your rules and
2019, yeah. Well, if we proceeded with, if Bruce got voted into a position and we find out differently by the next meeting, can we just update that at the next meeting?
I'm sorry, is the question whether the ex officio can vote or be,
They can't vote.
I don't think that, I think I remember that they
If they
cannot
can be
vote.
the chair?
If they could be the chair or vice
No,
chair.
okay, then no, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. No.
Yeah, and I don't think they're allowed to vote either, but that's what we wanted the clarification on, that they can't do either right now. I'll put that in my notes.
I'm only 100 yards into Largo, but yeah, that's.
If you want to come back to it, I just got a message that somebody's checking the code. If you want to go on to yours, we can come back to this item.
Okay, we'll come back to that then. So the next one will be director's report.
Afternoon, Eric Gandy, Marine and Aviation Director. I wanted to just touch on a couple current events, if you will, as you guys all have been following throughout the RFP process since June. City Council on January 12th approved the lease agreement between the city and Fly USA as a operating, development, and management agreement for Clearwater Airpark. It's a multifaceted agreement touching on several things, but first and foremost, it's to manage and operate a public use general aviation airport. That's the first mandate. That's one of the first things mentioned in the lease agreement, and that's critically important because that's what this is. So I wanted to speak to that and let you know kind of the timetable for this. So the turnover is March 1st. Mike and our staff went out today and posted some notifications out at the Airpark, both at the terminal and over the proxy card reader, so that any tenants coming in and going will be able to obtain Fly USA's information in the event Fly USA is unable to reach them. So we have tenant lists. We don't have all the contact information necessary to reach out to every tenant, and Fly USA will be reaching out to everyone they have and obtaining additional information, but we've left that as a resource for anyone out there, customers, tenants, to reach out to Fly USA. So there's an email and a phone number there, and we posted that today. So those outreach letters are out there. A lot's going on the backside. Fly USA is already moving forward with an approach for 1-6. I think that's huge. We've got a scope of work on that project. We're working through that because, during the course of the negotiations, their RFP response, that's their responsibility. However, the city has to own an approach. So the municipal government has to own the approach. So we're working through that to ensure that, we move that along. I think that's critically important, and timing is important to them to move it along quickly. Also, in terms of kind of their outreach, they've been in touch with the ARC regarding the fundraiser coming up a mere 3 days, I think, after they take over. They are committed to making that successful, so Mr. Shevlin's been in contact with the ARC, and they're going to work through any of the logistics related to that event. I know it's an important one for the ARC, and I think it's going to be an important one for Fly USA moving forward. They've had communications with Civil Air Patrol, and I put Mr. Shevlin in touch with Mike DeBuno with the EAA. So I think it's important, and it's important to them to establish those relationships and understand the history. And I think history is really important sometimes. You have to look back to see why things were done, how they were done, how things came to be. And a lot of times it's not so easy to find, and you have to talk to a lot of people to get to that history. So they're in that process now. As I mentioned earlier, we are looking at, we have some penny money, and you guys have mentioned it, we've had conversations over funding sources for that Airpark. We have some penny money for the terminal project. The hope is that we can move FDOT funding and obtain FDOT funding earlier than we have it incorporated into our CIPs and into our development plans, and then match that with $750,000 in penny money to get a little more bang for our buck in terms of what we can build in terms of a terminal and parking lot. So that's all in the works now. Mike's been in communication with FDOT. I've been working with our finance department to have those conversations. To that end, we went out and we know that the western fencing is a problem. So there's 6,000 feet of fence or so on that side, and it's completely overgrown with Brazilian peppers and palm trees and cabbage palms, and just it's a mess over there. So we looked at it and recognized that it's not as easy as moving the fence a foot to the east, because that interferes with our setbacks for the runway. So we have to have a comprehensive project to remove all that junk and then replace it with fencing. We're going with 8 foot with triple strand barbed wire atop that for security purposes. So I had conversations with finance on this, talked to the finance director a little bit about it, and we're going to sit down and discuss the ability to leverage some penny money, FDOT funding, if there's availability, and replace all the fencing at the Airpark.
Is that along Keene?
No, that runs just between the landings and the Airpark effectively.
Okay.
In total, we're looking at, what was it, 12, 15,000? 12.5. So it's expensive.
You say the fence around on all sides?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a huge project, but if we're able to leverage grant funding, it's doable from our end, and we would look at it and look at some penny money to balance that out in terms of our match. So it's ambitious because it's so expensive. I mean, we estimate it's several $1 million.
Eric, why does it have to be 8 feet with 3 feet of 3 strands of concertina?
Oh, it gets more complicated than that. I mean, when you talk about wildlife fencing and wildlife studies, it's just to prevent incursions on the runway and to, keep some kids from climbing the fence and running out in an active runway. So.
Okay. Because the rest of the perimeter that's open to the public is 6-foot fencing.
Yeah. Well, it's 8 along Hercules without wire.
Oh, yeah.
It's a mishmash.
I got it.
Hence,
Okay.
it's problematic. It's a bunch of different levels. I think what we're going to do, we've got a little bit of funding now, and as a stopgap, we're going to close about 500 feet on the southwest corner that's 6 foot, 8 foot, 5 foot. It's a mess. So we're going to work on that, and then
Real quick, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure, because I don't know all the intricacies of looking at doing an approach, but one of the things I've heard is that there wasn't enough setback with where the fence was and everything, so is that something that's being taken into
yeah,
consideration?
so we have to contemplate all of those things. You've got to contemplate that, not just for an approach, an instrument approach, but any approach. You have to contemplate all those to build structures. All of that has to come into play. I don't know this to be accurate, but I understood that in 2002, 2003, when they put the northernmost hangars in, the city built some stuff up off the end of 1/6, that it may have created a situation where that approach was no longer viable. So I don't know that to be true, but I've heard that.
We were told on this board a number of years ago now, they had some consultant come in, because I was always kind of the, how come we can't, this sort of thing. He came in and proved that it was impossible to have an approach to 1/6 because of the northern corporate hangars and the golf course, they said was too close. You know, and I don't remember what year that was, and
No.
the veracity of that, I'm not familiar with, but it clearly was going to be difficult. You know.
Yeah.
This is back in the era of the predecessor of your predecessor.
Sure,
You know.
sure. So, yeah, they're looking at that they have a legitimate consultant that does these things, and works with municipalities, with airports.
Yeah.
And I've looked at the scope of work briefly, just skimmed over it. I'm going to have a meeting with finance and procurement to determine how to proceed with that, because as I explained, they're going to pay for it, we're going to own it. How do we deal with the procurement component of that? And it may be pretty straightforward, based on the fact that no taxpayer money, no money is going to this from the citizens or the city. So needless to say, we're working through that, but you know, there's some challenges. I did look at, and Mike and I found an old map that's got to be 30, 40 years old on, you know, ambitious development projects for the Airpark. And so it's funny to see how these things have come and gone over the years. And then the other big project that Mike's been working on is we have a pavement management plan, and it's engaging with design and contractors to do mill and overlay in certain areas that we know are substandard, and then do the maintenance overlay stuff in areas that we can just improve from an overlay. Again, an expensive project, and you know, the starts with $1 million. So these things are not cheap, but we're going to work with Fly USA as well and say, listen, if we're going to proceed with this project, we want to make sure that we're not going to do a mill and overlay on an area that we're going to develop in 2 years. It would be a waste of money. So it's a couple moving parts to that, but we want to make sure that you know, we improve that, reduce the opportunity for FOD or propeller strikes with a depression in any piece of that pavement on the tarmac.
Yeah.
So,
Well, to that point, I've heard multiple conversations that there's concern for that on the actual turf tie downs, because it's the same thing. So I didn't know if the city had any kind of plans to level all of that in the midst of all of this other development, because I have concerns that if the shade hangars per se are torn down, and they're going to build a corporate hangar there, and that displaces those aircraft, they're thinking that there's enough tie-down space, because there is that second row right in front of the shade hangars, but that's pretty much unusable during the rainy season because it dips down and water all, you know, inundates that area. And I just know from in front of the FBO where I fly it with my plane, I mean, you're having to really take it slow because you're bouncing all the way till you get to hard turf. So I didn't know if there was any kind of plans to look at that, whether by the city or
yes.
Fly USA.
So part of this process and the turnover is an inspection, a pre-turnover inspection, post-turnover inspection, and then site assessments, and we're going to do those assessments kind of comprehensively to look at areas that need improvement, either by the city, Fly USA, or both. So all of that is on the table, and we recognize that those issues are there and exist. They've existed. I found records of depressions in the grass areas and
In a long time.
that they've filled over the years and compacted, and because I suspect some of it was on landfill material, that you have some subsidence in areas out there, I would imagine. So we have to look at all of those things, and in my letter to the tenants, I indicated that you're going to see us. I mean, we had 3 trucks out there looking at fencing a couple weeks ago, and you're going to continue to see our folks and any consultants that we use to evaluate these things. But certainly if there's any kind of displacement of tenants for a period of time while T-hangars are built, you have to make sure that they're in an area that's safe to operate out of. I mean, we don't need, rough field landing practice out there. So we've got to be very careful with this stuff. Some of the other things we're looking at is the rules that apply to the Airpark. I know this body had a lot of input when those were developed. They go with city managers, so those have to be updated, obviously. So there's a lot of things that we're trying to work through in preparation for this turnover on March 1st. So a lot of challenges ahead of us, but I think I'm optimistic and really excited about the prospects of making some real improvements out there. And, I think it's an opportunity to affect some change, not to it's just the way the city operated it for generations, and I think it's time to change that and take a more active role in making sure, for instance, if we replace thousands of feet of fence, that we have a maintenance schedule to keep the Brazilian peppers from growing through our $1 million fence, right? And that takes effort and, expenditure of funds, but you have to have it. You have to have capital maintenance. So we're going to be doing those assessments along the way to determine which structures, we have an idea what needs immediate attention, but we also have to prioritize all those things and figure out kind of an order of operations.
Eric, what you say certainly rings true, and one of the things that you just made me think about is, so Fly USA comes on board, and things like the fencing, the depressions, and so on, and I agree. I've flown in and out of there and bounced along too.
Should make it more fun.
Is it the city, or is it Fly USA as the tenant that's going to have some responsibility for inspection of the entire airfield and the fencing and so on?
Yeah, so they've got to do regular inspections, report back to us on any items that are our responsibility. Certainly, the fencing's our responsibility. Maintenance items fall to them.
Yes.
During the course of, so they build a new terminal and they have issues that come up with the build, subsequent to the build, they've got to take care of those things. But if it's some existing condition that we've got to address, those are our responsibility, obviously, and I've said that to council and mentioned it to you guys. I mean, we don't sign off all our liabilities to an operator, right? No one would take that deal if they said, oh, and by the way, here's $2 million bill for your fence or $3 million bill for your fence. So I think, you have to balance those things, and that's what took place during the course of all these negotiations in the lease. And I think, that, and we're talking about hundreds of hours of conversations between multiple individuals to get this to where it is. This, but you have to contemplate all those things. And you can't say that, oh, Fly USA, you're responsible for a hangar built in 1950s. It doesn't work like that.
Well, the draft lease is pretty clear that Fly USA would be responsible for the landscape maintenance, not choosing it or planting it, including cutting the grass with our mower, which we'll supply, but they have to take care of. But it doesn't mention any of the buildings or capital improvements there. Is any responsibility on their part other than to report it to us?
No. So
They have to keep it in a
code
safe.
provides for that. When you talk about building a new structure, you have to have so many parking spaces, and it has to be landscaping, and you have to deal with runoff, and you have to deal with all those things. So that's all provided for in code. And during they're reimbursing us fully for the expenses to build these things, and up to $2.4 million. So yes, there's no opportunity to circumvent code when it requires, you have to put vegetation in, and you have to put islands in the parking lot with vegetation and things of that nature. And, I can't speak to code specifically, but those are contained within in these development projects. So, yes, that would be their responsibility. If they're going to build a building out there and it requires a 4-foot hedge around the building, they've got to put a 4-foot hedge in as part of the project. So, I hope that makes sense.
I have one other question about Fly USA bringing in the turboprops. And if those planes come in, that's fine, but they are carrying passengers for pay. So does that force Part 135 on those operations?
No, there's a whole other set of rules related to that, but it's not a scheduled operation. They're
Because it's not scheduled.
yeah, and there's a lot of other check boxes related.
I know when you fly out Albert Whitted, particularly if you're in a twin, and you ask for clearance, one of the things they ask is, are you a Part 135? Because you got to go different from everybody else there. So if that affects,
I don't understand
Never heard
that.
that.
Yeah,
if we have to use 135, that it's going to alter the
No.
pattern, the noise reduction patterns that we
now,
have
this
there.
isn't gonna be a 135 operation,
Okay.
so.
There can be, you know, you can
Yeah.
fly jets under Part 91. You can fly turboprops, you can fly pure jets under Part
Yeah.
91.
Yeah,
It doesn't have to be 135 or
that
121.
sounded a little strange to me. You know, I know the city makes the policy. The tenant has to follow the policy. There are, I assume there are also some standard operating procedures for the airport, and I'm just wondering, there's no change in those from one tenant to the next?
No, pattern's the same, all those things, the conditions effectively, I don't think anyone's going to notice the difference as a tenant. The impact, the significant impact of any restrictions fall to the flight school, actually, in terms of number of helicopters that will be allowed out there, pattern activity after dark, flight training after sunset, and those kind of things. So those were conditions that we put in the lease that have never existed before. The existing lease would have allowed or allows for flight school operations anytime the airport is open. I mean, that is how the current operating conditions are. So we understood the neighborhood's input, and FlyUSA understood that, and we put significant number of restrictions and holiday restrictions on that have never existed before. And I think that's what, you know, the idea was to reduce that level of intensity and pattern work over the neighborhoods after dark, basically. And I think that's a significant departure from what it has been.
That's the kind of SOPs that I was wondering about, you
Yeah.
know, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, the question, and I always like to ask, I think I've asked you this before, but, I mean, I'm a big advocate of improving the Airpark, and is there any more thought, any further thought, perhaps, given to FAA grants?
At this point, no, because we met with the FAA, and as I mentioned previously, we met with them, and the grant assurances require you to do some things
Yeah.
that would certainly be in conflict with what the neighborhood came up here and spoke to us about.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think until that sentiment were to change, we're not pursuing grant funding.
Okay.
The best we can do is 80% from FDOT, and I think even it's very generous, and I think it allows us to do some things we couldn't do otherwise. So,
You know, I just wanted to make a comment relative to that, is the issue about airports being open 24 hours, that sort of thing. Airport open 24 hours doesn't really mean anybody has to be there, you know, it just means, and
That's right.
there's not going to really be any traffic at 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, even if it were open, you know, nobody's going to be landing there.
I think it's such a sensitive
Yeah,
topic.
but it's a very sensitive subject, absolutely.
And you know, I think if you look back, when they extended the hours to 11 p.m.,
Oh, yeah.
there
Oh, I
was a
see.
lot of pushback related to that.
Absolutely.
And for obvious reasons, you know, I at 3 o'clock in the morning, when the C-130 decides to go over my house in Safety Harbor,
Oh, sure.
I know about it. So I think
Know about
But
it.
how much traffic is there at 10 o'clock even right now? There's virtually nothing.
it's very little, and I
It's very
think
low.
it's overstated, that intensity at night.
Yeah.
Because, you know, part of my responsibility when I was a watch commander for the PD was to have people go check on the Airpark, and there's not a lot going on once the doors
That's
close. But
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that would be a non-starter
Yeah.
for the community.
Yeah, open doesn't mean the fuel pump has to be available. I mean, it's not available now between 9 and 11, you know, that sort of thing. It's just there.
If you followed, and listen, this is a different
I know.
scale, but if you followed Naples, they took FAA money. They then, because of the pushback from the neighboring communities, established a curfew, voluntary curfew.
Okay,
No one was adhering to the curfew, so then their latest effort is you can't pump gas during the hours of the curfew.
okay.
So it's they can't give back the FAA money.
Yeah.
They're beholden to the FAA, and now they're trying to figure out strategies. First voluntary curfew, then we were not pumping gas, now we're going to lock the terminal. And I mean, so I think they've tried to address the concerns through any kind of levers they have to pull, and those are the only things, shut off the fuel pumps at night.
Yeah.
So
Which ours are shut off because there's nobody manning them.
but it's a whole other, I mean,
Yeah.
that's a whole other level. Anyone who's flown into there, it's much, I mean, it's a different airport.
Well, to that point, since I'm talking to the council tomorrow, that I am still an advocate for taking FAA funding because I think we have appeased the neighborhoods by reducing the flight training
Yeah.
traffic, which I think is part of that busyness that most of the neighborhood representatives are thinking about. And now with that reduced, like you said, I don't think there's very much going on
It's not
at
going to be.
3 in the morning, but I think airport tenants would like the option to be able to come back if they're running a little late and not be getting stopped by the
Well, they can do that
security.
now, 11 o'clock.
No, well, sometimes you get weather somewhere that gets stuck. You don't have an instrument approach here, so you
Oh,
gotta wait
coming
till
late.
it's clear here to be able to come in if you're even instrument rated. So I will still be bringing that up to the council tomorrow.
ILS is another situation that you would get big pushback from the neighborhoods on.
There's no way you could.
Yeah, you
afford
wouldn't get
ILS.
ILS.
That's not even an option.
It's in the lease.
No,
No.
it's RNAV.
Yeah.
That's a totally
That's,
different.
yeah, different.
Well, and one
Those are
cat,
expensive enough, but.
one
ILS
caveat on saying it could be 24 hours, but people are not going to, once the airport is known as a 24-hour operation, people that we don't know about would be applying to come in there and lease space. And then you would have people coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning and whatever time.
Listen, we did our due diligence. We
Yeah.
had a meeting with the FAA and their
Yeah.
legal advisor to have this conversation because we knew, we'd heard a bunch of anecdotal information and we heard, and this
Sure.
one, that's the real deal. There's assurances that we would have to abide by. Could that change at some point? Absolutely. I mean, I don't see it. I don't see the desire to do that right now. But, people have had that conversation with me, so.
While we're talking about fencing, one thing I didn't want to forget to bring up today is the north gate, which got
Yeah.
damaged, and I don't know what its status is. And I'm partly as a safety concern, the fuel truck, it's a semi-trailer, when the north gate's operational, he can just drive in. The south gate is very hard for him to get through.
Sure,
And,
it's a
and out.
process. We had to have a design team, the fencing contractor, they have to build a new fence. It's a $20,000 fence, so
Yeah.
it's not like I got a gate there that just swings open and
Is
closes.
that still under operation? You're not
Yeah, it
saying
goes-
we're not going to repair it while we're waiting on this
No,
new fence?
we are completely replacing it.
Okay.
I think delivery date was in a couple weeks, right?
Okay.
28 was when.
Yeah, so it's ongoing.
Oh, yeah,
That-
yeah.
I've had people ask me about it.
Yeah, no,
and I'll ask.
these things take time.
Oh, sure.
And, you've got to reach out to the fencing contractor, they've got to build the new fence, and it's,
Yeah.
it's motorized, and it's got some
Okay.
things there that it's not just a gate we can.
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure, when you were talking about a new fence, that I went, oh, no, don't tell me.
No, we were out there.
We're
we
just
were
going to
out
hold
there.
off for a couple of years until we build a new fence.
No.
Okay, that's fine. Good.
Did anybody have any other questions?
Nope.
No? All right, thank
Thanks,
you, Eric.
Sure.
Thanks, sir.
All right, so we'll go back over, Ms. Sprout, did you
Yes,
get an answer?
so, per Robert's rules, an ex officio may serve as chair. But your bylaws and procedures are silent to the issue, so. I'm a lot silent.
Then it's a yes. Until you're told otherwise, yeah. Okay, so I think, I don't know, maybe we could move forward with something like that and then ask the council to put it into the ordinance or something for official status if
It
needed.
would be handled by your rules and regulations or your bylaws
Okay,
in the future if you guys wanted to address that.
okay,
For now, you may.
okay. All right, so we're back to our item of electing our 2023 chair and vice chair, so. do we
So I make a motion for the most obvious that you be nominated for chairman to continue your excellent leadership.
Well, thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
We got that done. Don't look at me.
I can't say a word, so.
Because you can't, so I'm not sure how that works. If he can't vote as an ex officio member, but then if you're like the chair or the vice chair, I'm not sure if that's like a conflict.
I could see where it would get a little muddy.
Because I would like to have Bruce be the vice chair, based on his long-term experience and membership on this board,
Yeah.
if it's possible.
I had not thought about this, but I would have to say, if you have 5 official voting members, what difference does it make? Why would that be a factor? You know,
Well, and that could be
I'm not-
true, too. So
I'm not
there's-
looking for the job, you know, I'm not campaigning, I don't mean that like that, but I just go, if there's 5 working members, what difference does it make if the ex officio was? I'm just talking out loud.
Which could be true, too. There's just some gray area.
Yeah, I'm just brainstorming here, so.
I'm fine with it if it's acceptable to everybody, if it's acceptable according to
Seems
the
like it is.
bylaws. You said we're silent on it. I don't know.
Seems like there's a little gray area there, so I feel like we should just go forward with it until we're told otherwise.
That's fine.
I'm okay with remaining chair. Bruce, would you be okay with being vice chair?
Second. Quick,
Aye.
quick.
Okay, all in favor?
Go to my table.
For me is chair, Bruce is vice chair.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Next item, any board members to be heard on any items that we didn't have on the agenda?
I was going to come in here and ask the city to please communicate to the city, to the citizenship, that the fact that we declared the airport property surplus was done by the city charter and not any nefarious effort by Fly USA to take over the landings. I get endless emails and phone calls, and my wife, who is involved as an organizer in the city, gets it all the time, and now she's forwarding her stuff to me. So I'm not going to ask. I think it's impossible to get the word out because of the skepticism. And the latest, just so you're aware, the latest is that there was a small municipal airport, I think in Maryland, and the city wanted to buy it from whoever, the county or whoever had it. And the deal is falling through because of the polluted ground. They found out it was a brownfield. And that drove the price up about $3 million to remediate the dirt. So now they're asking questions about the dirt up here, so get ready. I just told them to ask the city. They should write emails to their city commissioners or.
Is the pollution, the ground pollution here, is it something the city is looking at, worried about?
No, this all has to do with the fact that anytime the city leases a
Yeah.
property for over 5 years, they're required to declare it as surplus. I think that the confusion comes in when people opine as to what that really means.
Yeah.
The city attorneys have clearly stood up here and explained that it means nothing more than it's a formality we have to go through
Yeah.
to engage in a lease over 5 years. And I don't know, because like a lot of these things are taking place on social media, there's really no mechanism to combat that. And you know, some of them are exclusive kind of neighborhood connections
Yeah.
that the city doesn't engage with. I mean, we're not supposed to engage with some of these neighborhood apps, and so I don't know what more they could do, because honestly, it's taken place many times before.
Yeah.
anytime they engage in these longer-term leases. So I don't know what the answer is. I think, the legal advisor and the city attorney have answered that question several times and put things out. So I don't know what vehicle that we kind of get in front of the next rumor. I don't know.
Well, we just thank them for the information, and that we certainly will take it under consideration, take a look at it and see what's going on. There is a brownfield or a pollution problem at the north end up by Sarnago, because when the original proposed lease with the developer, Hogan or whoever it was, to put the light industrial warehouse complex in there, they would develop in 4 stages, starting at the south and moving up. And then the 4th stage on the northernmost part of that landing's property, there was a lease easement payback to them, credit, for $1.7 million to cover the remedial grading that needed to be done up there, because there was bad dirt under it, and it was going to cost them $1.7 million. So we were going to, the city had known about it evidently for a while, and that was a way of getting around it. So they would pay for it, and then we'd, let them off the hook for some of the rent payments. But the bad dirt is there, but you can, the corner of Drew and Martin Luther, up there where the school is, that was a brownfield. That used to be a city garage for decades. When they moved it out because of all the oil and that stuff that leaks out of garages, and nobody developed that thing or looked at that lot for years, and then finally Scientology, I guess, came in and was willing to pay to remediate it, and that's where the school is. So it can be done, but it involves costs.
Well, so circle back to the notifying people. So I really feel like this has been an ongoing thing. I mean, we've known for 9 months now, as far as there's going to be a new tenant, possibly, at least a new RFP that went out. And I really don't feel like the city did a good job with informing the public. And the things that did come out, like this surplus of land, was not in very good plain language for those who did see it, because I know I got multiple emails about it too, like, what does this mean? And I've heard, I'm not sure what else we could do, but wow, has my email been flooded? And I got a nice little placard in the mail about the city's tree inventory thing that they're doing, that now they have to put it on halt because of people are getting upset about cutting down 100-year-old trees.
Oh, God,
But I mean, I've gotten multiple emails about that, talking about what stage the city is in with that right now, what they're gonna do moving forward. Got this nice pamphlet about what all has been done, why it's stopped now, what's gonna happen, and I don't feel like any of that was done for the Airpark, even though the city knows that this has been like a contentious thing for many years, not just this year, and needing to appease so many different, groups. And you've mentioned that yourself, Eric, that was a tough thing to try to make everybody happy as much as possible. And I just think that moving forward, maybe the city could incorporate utilizing some things like that to get information out. Those seemed to be done in more plain language that was easily understandable. I don't think we've done that good job with that with the Airpark, and I hope we can do some more things like that, because not everybody's on Facebook. So I mean, you could put something out on the city Facebook page, but the little old lady across the street from me is not on Facebook, but she, will get that little pamphlet in her mail and would be able to see it. So I mean, I think thinking outside the box, but utilizing other things that the city does for other things that they have going on. Maybe we could start doing that.
On a minor note, I'd like to just put in the record, we have a Young Eagles event for March 11. We will communicate with Mr. Shevlin and make sure that that's okay with him and all that, so we'll take care of that. Just put it on the record there. We canceled our January event due to weather. We'll try again.
So did anybody else have anything else they wanted to add? Okay, so I'll just remind everybody, tomorrow I'm doing our yearly recap for the council at their meeting tomorrow night. So I'll be talking about what things we have been able to discuss and what we didn't get to this past year, and our plans for moving forward.
Yeah. And the fact that we had an extensive review with Fly USA.
With our special session and stuff.
Yeah.
Yep, we'll be talking about
Okay.
all of that and different delays we ran into and why, and wanting to be more proactive versus reactive in the future, because I feel like we're running a parallel line, but we haven't quite intersected yet for some of these things that I think we could be more on top of if we're given the opportunity to. So if there is not anything else, then I will say our meeting is adjourned, as we've gone through our agenda.
Thank you.
Great.